Hey guys, welcome to the channel, and today we're going to go over the Set 19 tier list. Now, again, I keep saying this, is this a tier list? Is this more of just like kind of an overview of trends we saw? I'm not really sure, because there's no numbers. I'm not really pulling from tournament results. But as a TO, as a semi-competitive player at this point, I do compete, but not as much as I used to. You do notice trends, just some decks are just built different, it's how it goes. But at the same time, by the time that me as a content creator drops the video, by the time you guys as viewers consume it, and then by the time we've kind of come to our own conclusions, it's already time for a new meta, new sets, new cards, and new things to worry about. So it feels like the timeline for a meta is super rushed, but at the same time, like with the state of the game, things get very stale very fast. So I think it somehow balances out. With that being said though, before we get into the tier list, let's go over the tier list guidelines. So just 4 simple rules. Number 1, I am just one guy talking about PNG cards on the internet. If a deck that you really like isn't well represented on this tier list or not represented at all, that doesn't mean that you can't play the deck you enjoy playing. That just means our opinions are different, and that's okay. Number 2, not every deck will be represented. There's too many deck concepts and different clans to really put it all together in one video. We just don't have enough time for that in one YouTube video. But there's other concepts or decks that you want me to talk about in other videos, or maybe there's a deck on this tier list, a deck that's not on this tier list that you're kind of curious where I think it lands. You can just let me know in the comments below, and we can either get to it in the comments or on social media or in another video, kind of like discussion style. 3, this tier list is described in proximity. So think of it as like S is the strongest tier, and the stuff that's in that S or at the top of the tier list is really going to set the standard for the rest of the meta. So you can kind of think of like B tier is further from S tier than is like A is closer. So if a deck's in A tier, it's obviously stronger than B tier. It doesn't mean that B tier is unplayable or it's trash tier. It just means that B tier decks aren't as strong inherently as S tier decks. And number 4, play whatever the heck you want. At the end of the day, we play this game to have fun, not to win tournaments. If that's what you do, you know, to each their own. But really, we downloaded this game, we keep playing it because at least to some degree we enjoy it. So with that, let's get into the tier list. So kind of to start, we're going to start off with the B tier. Let's get everything on here. And nothing is ordered within the tiers. So it's more separated by category, or like more by concept, I guess is a better way to put it. So just remember, nothing within the tiers are ordered, but like B is obviously weaker than A, and S is obviously stronger than B. With that being said, something like this. So I think that this is a really good place to start for our B tier or the lowest tier. I think everything on here is somewhat viable. We're seeing players play it. I've lost to it. I've beaten every deck on this tier list, and I've played almost every deck that I'm talking about on this tier list. So B tier is kind of separated by decks that have a higher ceiling, have a higher damage output, do more stuff, but as a caveat, they aren't as consistent. You'll see a lot of decks like DI, Great Nature, Dimension Police, and even Pale Moon to an extent have really strong game states that they can get to, and or they have really strong game states that are very similar to some of the top decks in the meta. The issue is that it's not as consistent as some of the top decks in the meta, and so as a player who is purely trying to win money or trying to climb rank the fastest, you feel like you're not as incentivized to play these decks in B tier because they're just not as consistent, or they don't hit as hard as some of the other decks. DI still kind of pushes crits like Ragey, and while it is a little bit harder to charge 20 soul than it is to charge 15, it has great synergy with some of the long-standing staples in the deck, and you can't really sleep on this deck. It will like steal wins from you if you're not careful, and it does have some pretty good matchups. Also like Chariot, like looping heals and like having 8 heals in deck is kind of broken, so there's that. DP has PG negate, it has board retire, it has crit, but it's a little inconsistent. It's very good at building numbers and getting off Legion and consistently looping Legion 3, 4, 5, 6 times a game. It's just sometimes you're gonna struggle to find PGs and intercepts. I really do love this deck. I think if it was more consistent in those other capacities, it would actually be like a top tier contender or like on the fringe. Great Nature on a good day is kind of similar to a lot of these decks. Feel like an A tier deck, but the issue is that it's kind of high rolly. It kind of feels like a glass cannon, and there's so many other better glass cannon options. Like Narukami is a glass cannon, Pale Moon is a glass cannon, but they hit way harder more often than Great Nature. So like you really gotta love this deck, and you really gotta know what you're doing to do well with this deck. Pale Moon is kind of in this weird spot. Honestly, I did test this one extensively because I saw a lot of controversy about this deck in the community. A lot of people were like, this is a meme deck, this is a trash deck. And so I really went to town with it. I did post this on YouTube, but if this is something you guys want to see, we can arrange for that. I just felt like I don't know if you guys wanted to see another meme deck, which is why this week I gave you guys the Shadow Paladin deck, something a little bit more relevant for most players. But yeah, Dreamy Fortress kind of turns off a lot of these big multi-attack decks. So it turns off the Zenith and Golds, it turns off the PBA and Shadows, it turns off Thing Saver and the countercharging and Royals. Genesis can't hit it. Other strong decks, like basically all the strong decks struggle against this. Even a deck like Kagura that has a really strong matchup defining piece like Draconic Overlord. I mean, yeah, you can clear their board, but it still doesn't change the fact that sorry about that, that the Legion Pale Moon piece, or if you're on Luki Reverse, your column's going to be massive anyways after they get rid of all your Dreamies, so they're not even guaranteed to get 3 swings to face. Most of the time they're only going to get 1, maybe 2. And so it's a really good defensive deck, really strong anti-meta option, but it's kind of inconsistent. Angel Feathers and Neo Nectar are great examples of decks that are more consistent, but they don't really do as much. Like you still have Elvira, which is basically Reiji 2.0, you know, call a full board, get double intercepts, try to dig so you can find those heals, those PGs on the drive check. But it's really reliant on hitting triggers and a couple of other things to get going. The Legion mates really only either help numbers if you're playing the Vera or the Martina, which I didn't initially like Martina, but I like Martina because she helps you build a board for free. Between her and Sylvia, it's really easy to gain card advantage and allows more slots in the triggers for crits and stands. So I think those cards are really important. They do help the deck. The deck isn't unplayable, but it is definitely struggle bus. And then Witches, they'll get better when their main ride becomes a CB2 skill. I've lost this deck, I've beaten this deck. It is not a bad deck. If you like Witches, I guess, you know, keep playing Witches. Next, we're gonna get into the A- tier. Well, that doesn't, yeah. And we don't have too many decks here in A-. I think something like this. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about it. So I have both OTT decks and I have Blau in this. Blau can kind of feel like a low roll, but this deck's a lot more consistent than we think it is, and it is still the best restander in the game. You can't really deny that. And so, just like either playing the Stern Blau line with Ethics Buster, or you're playing Moan Blau with Galaxy Blau, it's still a really strong deck. I kind of rate the OTT decks in the same spot. Tsukiyomi's still really good. It's gonna get a little bit better since it'll have some better popular matchups in the form of BT next month with the whole new support they're getting there. And then Battle Sisters, they're okay. Like, I know a lot of people were turned off by a lot of the CB3 or the when you Legion do this skill kind of effects, but it is good. You do put back heals. I've seen a lot of success from players playing 5 heal builds, and it's not a bad deck. I mean, you still have Silent Tom, you can play offensive triggers in here, it digs like crazy, and like under the right conditions this deck can really pop off, and I think it's in the similar spot with Sook right now. Next we're going to talk about the A tier, and there's a couple of decks in here. I think these decks are on the cusp of, like, they're on the cusp of greatness, if you will. So we have LJ, we have Narukami, we have Ezel, and we have Kagero. So I think Novella is still really good. It's like the meta still kind of like favors its speed in those regards, but it is very piece reliant, and sometimes it just feels like it can miss. Like in last month's tier list, we talked about how Kagero and Revengers offer similar stuff, but in different ways. They're both really good at pushing. They're both really good at, you know, just getting the job done. They have great finishers, but Revengers just got more support. Kagero will be kind of moving up next month. I don't think it's bad. I think it's a great pick into some of the more popular options. Ezel's kind of starting to fall. I almost wanted to put Ezel here in A-, and I'm not really sure if it's here. But less break red reliant decks, even though Shadows does rely on the break red, so you can kind of bully them, but the deck isn't as reliant on the Mordred Phantom as it once was. So yeah, like Ezel still can do okay, but it can feel a little frail sometimes. Finding PGs with that deck is not the easiest thing. LJ, there's less unlockers, less Ezel right now, because more people are playing Libs, more people are playing like the other Paladin decks and other stuff that don't really deal with this well, especially with Marichika and Anna being nerfed once per turn. Halo Moon is less of a threat against this deck, and I still think this is one of the best counter picks options you could bring for a multi-deck format or a team format. And then like Brawlers, it's so close to being good. I really struggle against this deck, and I think that if you play Gunners, you can actually have an easier time against decks like Shadows. I wouldn't say it's a winnable matchup, like it wins it hardcore, but it definitely is a deck that can compete with stuff at the top of the tier list. I really do like Brawlers. I think they're only going to get better, especially with the new support. So kind of excited to see where that goes. Next, we're going to talk about S tier. We got quite a few decks here. I guess I should put this in here too. Risers. We're going to put Risers in A tier. Tank Riser kind of helps, especially in a Paladin meta, before we get to S tier. Yeah, Risers. Tank Riser is pretty good. But if you whiff Tank Riser, it feels kind of slow. Because you really do need that, like, retire restrict to protect your board, so that way you can feel safe pushing them to 5 with the crit. They have a restander in the form of the Drill Wing. The deck is great. It's got great flexibility. Nova players usually sack anyways, so they're probably going to win if they're playing this deck anyways. This deck's really strong. I think it functions in a similar capacity to something like Ezel. And I think it's like basically like a stronger version of the DI and DP strategy to a degree. Not full on, but there are a lot of overlap. In the S tier, we have Gold Paladins, you know, the Bluish Flames, the Garmors, the Percivals, the Zeniths. We have Pale Moon. Oh, that doesn't go there. We have Royal Paladin, and we have Genesis. So I still think that like these decks were the representative like best decks in format from last month, with Pale Moon kind of being the queen of the game. With the nerfs, it brings it more in line with the best stuff in the meta. I still think this is super viable. Some people may put it here. I still think it's really strong. I mean, you can still do 2 to 6 people. You're just more reliant on the Ava for that strat, but I think like 3 to 6ing or 4 to 6ing is still really strong in this deck. You can't discredit how good 3 to 6ing people is, so we're gonna leave it there. Gold is still here for the relative same reasons. They just got more cards that reward them for playing cards in the early game. So like Percival is a free superior call. I feel like the deck was already really consistent, really strong, and now with Legion as a mechanic, it just helps loop those really strong resources. It's got great ways to get stuff out of the soul with Dendros and the just different stuff, so it's got a lot of great Legion synergy. But more than anything, we have Garmor. Garmor really does push this deck over the edge, considering that this really is the Paladin meta. A lot of the best decks in the meta like to retire to some capacity. Whether you're getting rid of back row with Hesperus and Genesis, or, you know, doing a Kagero stuff, or, you know, Blaster Dark Revenger or Blaster Dark Revenger Abyss retiring boards. It kind of shuts that down, and although it feels a little bit slower than some of these other really strong decks, right? It still has that anti-meta aspect, and it's already like really super consistent anyways, so yeah, there's that. Seekers is still Seekers. Like, I really don't think this was ever best deck in the format, but it's still a really strong deck. Don't get it twisted. And Genesis can feel a little bit inconsistent at times, but it still does have a really high ceiling, has great finishers, has a grade 3 for every scenario, has great grade 2s, great grade 1s. The card pool is absolutely insane. I really do like the place of Genesis right now, although their matchup against Shadows is, much to be desired, but as it goes. Finally, we have Shadow Paladin, which I have officially dubbed the best deck in the format. If you disagree with me, I don't care. This deck is just silly. Let's talk about it. Why do I think this is best deck in the format? So we're actually gonna do this. So why do I think Shadows is the best deck in the format? It is extremely consistent. You have the Judge Bow starter, CB1 call 2, you can call double Swordbreaker, you can get your Dorant for that break ride turn. It's got so many ways to build card advantage. It's kind of crazy. The amount of ways to build card advantage outweigh the amount of ways that the deck forces you to retire your own pieces and forces you to minus to get off skills like PBA and Cormac and just in general set up boards with Blaster Dark Revenger and then like have the Dorant. It doesn't matter how much you retire, the deck is going to draw more cards. It's going to superior call more cards than you're going to get rid of by a large amount. It's not break ride reliant, but the break ride is absolutely busted, guys. Oh my gosh, Mordra Phantom is just like give 5k to anything. It makes your main scale, it makes everything scale, and it turns this deck into a very threatening 3-6 deck. I think that's where it shines best, is 3-6. You can wave check them for 2 PGs if they don't have the double PG, or they don't have a like double 6 damage heal or some combination of that. They will probably lose because Blaster Dark Revenger being a 1 retire with Dorant and then giving the 5k to something when you break right and then using PBA to restand is absolutely just pure destruction. It's got cheap retire, like I said. BDR is a 1 retire and it retires anything. It's really good in the mirror match because you can get rid of opposing Judge Bows. So if you go first, you're usually in a really good spot to get off your own Judge Bow and turn off their Judge Bow with the right hand. This deck does suffer from going second against like retire heavy decks, but I'll talk about that in the cons. And then of course it's got the second best restander in the game. Like of course Blau is still wow. It's just that deck's will always be goated. But Revengers, PBA is just a straight up upgrade from Raging Form. I talked about this in the last video that I posted from last week, talking about my Revengers deck, the deck that I have both on the main account and the free to play account. It's CB1 on the turn you Legion to pop 3 cards. There's no Persona Blast effect. You're not rewriting. You retain all trigger values. You just restand, draw 2 cards. It's already a passive 22k before you do anything. So your opponent's defensives don't matter, and it feels kind of backwards. Like we just got out of a meta where Pale Moon said, I don't care about your numbers. I have the Lion on rear and I have the Lucia reverse on Van, and I will just swing over all of your draw triggers and heal triggers. And this deck just does that again between the Mordred Phantom break ride, giving your rear guard that extra 5k, and PBA just being just a really strong card. This card puts the deck over the edge, and there have been many times where either I've played the deck or I've noticed other people playing against the deck. They PBA, they find PGs, they get the quad drive check, so you're getting something akin to Dote, and now you're seeing extra heal triggers, you're seeing extra draw triggers. They just get too much for what they have to put in. Like the risk to reward for this deck is very skewed. You can just kind of go for it, and it's kind of crazy. Cons is the deck has problems in the long game, specifically with deck out. So like if you play the mains, you'll find that like if you go for all of the draw skills, you will deck out, but no smart player is going to deck out in 90% of their games unless it's like really awkward, like an awkward situation. So it's like you definitely don't want to like plan for the deck out against this deck. That is not the way to beat it. I do think that it does struggle against Rush because it does love setting up the break ride still, so you can kind of just like push face, Gunners and Brawlers, or like, you can play Garmor to draw out the game, and as long as you have some PGs, you have your Blaster Blade Liberators, you can kind of just like swing face and go about it that way. There's a lot of ways to deal with this deck. It is not the end all be all, and I think that its placement in comparison to the other decks is actually not that far off, but I do think it's apparent that this is by far better than the stuff here. So with that, guys, this is a tier list. let me know what you guys think of my tier list in the comments below. I know some of y'all aren't gonna like this, you know, but if you enjoyed the content today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, but only if you enjoyed the content today or you enjoyed the content in general on the channel. I'm gonna go eat lunch.